The sun burned low over the endless horizon of the southern savanna, casting molten ribbons of amber across the swaying grasslands as dusk approached with solemn grace. Dust hung in the air like memory, still and golden, as if the land itself was holding its breath. In the distance, the silhouettes of acacia trees reached like skeletal arms into the crimson sky. And there, in the deepening shadows, stood a figure unlike any other, a massive bull buffalo named Kazi, his broad frame outlined in blood-orange light, the scars of old battles etched across his flanks like ancient carvings. His breath was slow but vigilant, and his deep, intelligent eyes flicked toward the smallest tremor in the underbrush. Around him grazed his small herd, 15 strong, including calves and aging cows, his family, his purpose, and the silent promise he guarded each day. Kazi was not the largest buffalo in the plains nor the youngest, but he carried something more enduring than muscle, a soul bruised by loss, tempered by survival, and lit by an unwavering loyalty that no predator had ever broken. Years ago, he had watched helplessly as his sibling fell to a lion ambush near the river bend. Since then, he had vowed, silently and unshakably, that no other member of his herd would face that same fate while he still drew breath. But this dusk brought with it a strange silence that pressed against the chest like mourning. The birds had gone still, their calls swallowed by a windless hush. The distant thrum of life faded, replaced by an unnatural stillness. Kazi's ears twitched. Something was wrong. The younger bulls near the edge of the herd began to shift nervously, nostrils flaring, their hooves pawing the earth in silent warning. And then he saw them, ghosts in the grass. 4, 5, 6 shapes sliding low through the tall grass like ripples in a golden sea. Lions. Not just 1 or 2 outliers, but a full pride, lean and calculating, led by a lioness with a jagged scar down her flank and hunger in her eyes. They weren't hunting for survival, they were hunting with strategy, precision, the kind that meant they had done this before. Kazi moved forward slowly, placing himself between the pride and the youngest calves at the center of the herd. The other buffalo tightened their circle instinctively. But Kazi didn't flinch. He locked eyes with the lead lioness, a stare that was not a threat but a declaration. To reach them, you must go through me. The wind shifted, and with it came the scent of blood from some far-off kill. A distraction, or a message. Either way, the lions began their slow arc around the herd. And then, as the last of the sun vanished behind the hills, they charged. It was chaos. Dust exploded into the sky, hooves thundered, calves screamed, cows bellowed, and in the middle of it all, Kazi hurled himself toward the pride. He collided with one of the younger males, sending it sprawling into the dirt with a crack that echoed across the plain. A second lion leapt onto Kazi's side, claws digging into his hide, but he spun like a storm, slamming his horn into the predator's ribs and flinging it off. Pain surged through his leg as another lion caught him from behind, sinking fangs into his flank. But he did not fall. He roared, not like a beast, but like a monument refusing erosion, and drove forward, forcing the pride to split. 2 calves broke from the group in panic, running toward the riverbed, and Kazi turned, heart splitting, instincts screaming, stay with the herd or save the young. And in that instant, he made the impossible choice. He ran. With blood dripping down his side and pain burning in every limb, Kazi tore through the grass after the calves, knowing the lions would follow, that they would see him as weaker now. But that was the point. He would lead them away, by the herd time, even if it meant facing death alone. The thunder of paws behind him confirmed it. The lions were coming. He glanced back once, just long enough to see the youngest calf stumble near a gully, legs shaking. And just ahead, something unexpected. A fence. Rusted, human-made, part of an abandoned cattle enclosure swallowed by years of dust and neglect. Beyond it, safety. Maybe. Kazi bellowed, urging the calves forward, his voice cutting through the night like a war cry. But the lions were gaining. And just as the first leapt toward the stumbling calf, Kazi threw himself sideways, taking the full weight of the predator mid-air, the 2 of them crashing into the dry earth in a cloud of blood and fury. The calf made it past the fence. Kazi did not. The lion's jaws locked onto his shoulder, and from the tall grass, others emerged, circling, ready to finish what had begun. He looked up through the swirling dust and met the eyes of the calves, now watching from beyond the fence, their bodies pressed against the wire, trembling. Kazi's breath heaved. His eyes never wavered. He had kept his promise. But this fight was far from over. In the hills beyond the fence, a small light blinked, far-off headlights of a ranger's truck. Unknowing. Unready. And in the middle of the plain, beneath a rising moon and a sky now scattered with stars, a buffalo stood wounded but unbowed, surrounded by predators, blood staining the earth beneath him, and still, he did not fall. Not yet. Not while they were watching. Not while they were safe. If this story moved you, follow for the next chapter of Kazi's journey, a tale of survival, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bond that defies instinct. Because sometimes, the wild teaches us what it truly means to love. ChatGPT. The night spread over the savannah like a slow exhale, smothering the land in its velvet darkness, but there was no rest in the shadow of the fence. Kazi stood bleeding, his body racked with pain, a ragged wound torn into his shoulder where the lion's teeth had sunk deep, and yet his legs refused to buckle. The lions circled, 5 of them now, eyes glowing like dying coals, muscles twitching beneath their tawny coats, waiting for the old bull to collapse under his own defiance. But Kazi, heart hammering like a distant drum, would not fall. Not yet. Behind him, just beyond the rusted fence, the 2 calves watched, their wide eyes full of something that had no name, something between terror and awe, as if they knew this moment would shape not just their fate, but something older, something woven into the bones of the earth. A breeze stirred, warm and heavy with the scent of blood and dust, and in it came a sound, the low hum of an approaching vehicle, faint, distant, but steady. The lions paused, heads lifting, ears turning. Kazi's ears twitched too, registering the change, and though he did not understand the meaning of the noise, he felt its weight like the beat of a distant storm. The lioness with a scar moved first, slowly, purposefully, her eyes locked not on Kazi's torn flesh but on his spirit, that stubborn, unyielding flame that would not die. She stepped forward, low and silent, then broke into a sprint, her body a blur of fury and hunger. Kazi lowered his head, the moonlight catching the curve of his horns, and charged. Their bodies collided in a cloud of dust and growls, and again, the old warrior proved he would not yield. He swung his massive head, horns cutting the air, and struck her across the ribs with such force that her growl turned to a yelp, and she rolled across the earth, stunned but not broken. But while she fell, the others moved in. Claws raked his side, teeth tore at his haunches, and the pain nearly drove him to his knees. Still, he stood. Still, he fought. A bellow tore from his throat, ancient and primal, a sound that echoed over the plains like thunder, a call not of fear, but of declaration. I am still here. The approaching lights grew brighter now, closer, cutting through the night with white beams that danced across the dry earth. The lions hesitated. They had learned to fear those lights. The lioness rose again, limping, snarling, torn between instinct and calculation. Kazi took the chance. With a lurching step, he turned and drove toward the fence, placing his body between the calves and the pride once more, not just as guardian, but as a barrier of flesh and will. The vehicle, a battered ranger's truck, crested the hill and skidded to a stop, dust exploding from beneath its tires. The door flung open, and a man stepped out, rifle in hand, flashlight in the other, his silhouette framed by the glare of the headlights. His name was Elias, a ranger of 35 years, worn by sun and silence, a man who had seen enough death to know when something deserved to live. He raised the flashlight, the beam cutting across the scene, and what he saw made him freeze. A lone buffalo, massive and bleeding, standing between 2 calves and a half-circle of lions. Elias had witnessed countless hunts in his life, seen predators take prey, accepted the laws of nature as they were written in claw and tooth, but this was something else. This was not instinct. This was choice. He lowered the rifle slowly, eyes fixed on the bull. "What are you doing, old man?" he whispered, as if speaking might unravel the fragile miracle before him. The lioness snarled and lunged again, and Elias, without thought, fired into the air. The sound shattered the night. The lions scattered, startled, retreating into the brush, their hunt broken not by fear of death, but by the unknown, by the convergence of man and beast and something that felt like reverence. Kazi did not move. His legs trembled, and blood poured freely from his wounds, but his eyes remained on the brush, waiting, always waiting, until he was certain the danger had passed. Only then did he take one staggering step back and collapse, his breath heavy, the world spinning. The calves pressed against the fence, trying to reach him, their soft whimpers carried by the wind. Elias rushed forward, crouching beside the fallen giant. He had no explanation for what he felt in that moment, something between sorrow and awe, like standing before a monument not built by hands but by time and pain. He reached out cautiously, placing a hand on Kazi's thick neck, feeling the slow, shuddering pulse beneath the skin. "You're not just a buffalo," he muttered, shaking his head. "You're a damn legend." But Kazi's eyes fluttered closed. His body had done all it could. Now it was up to fate, and perhaps to a man he had never met, to carry the flame forward. Elias stood, waved toward the truck, and a second figure emerged, a young veterinarian named Layla, recently assigned to the preserve. She was in her 20s, full of fire and frustration at a world that too often ignored suffering, human or otherwise. She saw the buffalo, the blood, the calves, and then something shifted in her face. Not horror, not shock, but purpose. "We need to move him," she said. "We can't leave him here." Elias hesitated. "He's too big, too injured. We won't make it in time." "We have to try," she snapped. "Look at them." She pointed to the calves, still trembling against the fence, still watching. "They believe in him. That means something." It took an hour to rig a sling with the help of another ranger, and a makeshift harness to lift Kazi into the flatbed of the truck. Layla rode beside him, whispering soothing nonsense as if he could hear her through the fog of pain. The calves were coaxed through a gate and into a nearby corral, safe, for now. As the truck rumbled through the dark toward the small field clinic at the edge of the reserve, the sky began to lighten, just a whisper of silver on the eastern horizon. In the distance, the lioness watched from the tall grass, her flank aching, her hunger unsatisfied. But in her eyes, there was no hatred. Only respect. She had fought many beasts in her life, but none like that bull. And perhaps she, too, understood that something rare had passed through the night, something worth remembering. At the clinic, under the hum of sterile lights and the hush of exhausted breath, Layla cleaned Kazi's wounds, stitched torn flesh, and administered what medicine she had. He didn't stir, not once, but his heart kept beating. Steady. Relentless. And as dawn broke fully over the plains, bathing the clinic in gold and rose, she placed a hand over his massive chest and whispered, "Stay with us. They need you. We all do." Outside, Elias stood watching the horizon, arms crossed, brow furrowed. He didn't believe in fate. He believed in the land and its cruelty. But that night had shaken something loose inside him, something he thought long buried. Behind him, he heard the soft steps of hooves. The calves had followed. They stood beside the clinic door, silent and unmoving, as if holding vigil. He sighed. "Fine," he muttered. "Stay. But don't get in the way." They didn't move. They simply watched, eyes wide, ears twitching, and the old ranger didn't tell them to leave again. Because somehow, deep in his chest, Elias understood the truth. This wasn't just survival. This was loyalty. This was love in its most feral, fearless form. And somewhere inside that sleeping beast, the story was far from over. What would you risk for those who trust you without question? Morning settled gently over the plains, casting long golden beams across the wounded land, but inside the modest ranger outpost turned emergency clinic, time moved differently. Slower, heavier, like the hush after a storm when the world seems to pause and wait. Kazi lay unmoving on the straw-covered floor of the holding pen, his massive frame rising and falling with shallow breaths, each exhale a quiet defiance against the death that hovered near. The scent of antiseptic mingled with the musk of old blood, and the earthy presence of the two calves pressed close against the outside of the pen, their bodies leaning into the wire mesh as if touch alone might keep him tethered to the world. Layla hadn't slept. Her dark curls were tied hastily behind her head, her hands smeared with dried medicine and dirt, but her eyes remained alert, flickering over every inch of Kazi's frame, monitoring the swelling in his shoulder, the rise of his chest, the color of his gums, tiny signs that told her this fight wasn't over. She had treated buffalo before, dozens in her young career, but never one like him. Never one who bore such weight in his silence. Never one who seemed to draw gravity itself toward him, as if the fate of more than a body rested in the outcome of this struggle. Outside, Elias smoked in silence, his fingers trembling not from the chill but from something deeper, something unsettled. He had seen animals fight for survival, seen them defend their young, flee from danger, even retaliate when wounded. But this buffalo had stood against the impossible not for himself, but for others, and now the calves lingered near as if watching over him in turn. Something about it made the old ranger feel smaller than he liked. As the sun climbed, Kazi stirred. Barely. A twitch of the ear, a deepening breath, the smallest tilt of his head as he tried to orient himself in the strange light of human walls. Layla noticed immediately, her hand flying to his flank. "He's waking," she whispered, her voice trembling. Kazi blinked once. The ceiling blurred and resolved again. Smells unfamiliar, sounds unnatural. His instincts screamed to flee, but his body refused. Pain throbbed in every joint, his shoulder a blaze of agony. But more than that was confusion. Where were the calves? The herd? Had he failed? Had the lions finished what they started? He groaned low, trying to rise, but his legs folded beneath him like straw. Layla placed a hand gently on his forehead, speaking in soft tones he could not understand, but her presence was calm, not a threat. Outside the pen, the calves let out high-pitched bleats, and Kazi's head turned sharply. They were alive. Watching. He froze, tears welling in Layla's eyes as she saw the shift in his body language. Recognition, relief, and something close to peace. For the next hour, he lay still, saving strength, his ears occasionally twitching toward the door as the wind shifted, always alert for danger, even in weakness. Elias entered quietly, his boots soft against the clinic floor, and leaned against the gate. "You should have died out there," he said in a low voice, more to himself than anyone. "But you didn't. Not because of luck. Because of choice." He glanced at Layla. "What now?" She didn't answer immediately. She was examining the wound again, gently testing the edge of the sutures. "We wait," she said. "There's nothing else. Either his body holds on, or it doesn't." Elias exhaled through his nose, rubbing the bridge of his weathered face. "I've seen death up close. Plenty. But this one. I don't want to lose him." Layla didn't look up. "Then maybe don't give up on him before he's ready to give up on himself." Outside, clouds gathered on the distant horizon, heavy and gray, hinting at a storm. The wind had shifted, cooler now, laced with moisture. Far away, birds moved in sudden flocks, their patterns broken, chaotic. Nature sensed something coming. That afternoon, a vehicle pulled into the reserve, a battered white pickup with government plates, and out stepped a woman with iron-gray hair tied in a braid, eyes sharp as obsidian. Her name was Dr. Meredith Shaw, head of Regional Wildlife Management, and though she'd spent her career advocating for preservation, she had little patience for sentiment. She approached the clinic, clipboard in hand. "The buffalo. Where is it?" Elias didn't answer. He simply stepped aside and gestured toward the pen. Shaw approached, eyebrows raised as she took in the sight. Wounded bull, 2 calves, and 2 humans keeping vigil like parishioners at a shrine. "I heard the report. Lions, wounded calves, ranger intervention," she said. "You should have let nature take its course." Layla turned sharply, anger rising. "Nature didn't take its course. He did. He made a decision. He didn't run. He stood his ground and saved them." Shaw raised an eyebrow. "And now what? We keep a dying buffalo alive because it made you feel something." Elias stepped forward. "He made me feel something. That hasn't happened in a long time." Shaw was silent. She stepped closer to the pen and stared into Kazi's eyes. Something passed between them, not understanding, not quite, but something ancient. A weight. She sighed. 1 week. If he doesn't stand by then, we release the calves and let him go. Layla looked ready to argue, but Elias placed a hand on her shoulder. A week is better than a bullet. That night, the storm came. Not sudden, but relentless. Rain fell in sheets, hammering the tin roof of the clinic, and wind howled through the trees. Inside, Kazi shivered, not from cold but from the pressure of air and memory. Storms always reminded him of the night his brother died, the roar of lions swallowed by thunder, the sting of rain on wounds. The calves pressed tighter against the pen. Layla brought extra blankets, laid straw, did everything she could, but Kazi's breath grew labored. As lightning split the sky, Layla curled up near the wall and whispered to the dark, "Please don't leave us." The next morning, he stood. Not fully. Not easily. But he rose, legs trembling, wounds aching, ribs screaming, and he stood. The calves cried out in joy, and Layla covered her mouth with both hands, tears spilling freely. Elias exhaled like he hadn't breathed in years. Dr. Shaw, watching from the doorway, said nothing, but turned and walked back to her truck, scribbling something on her clipboard. Later, she would file a recommendation to reclassify the area near the clinic as a sanctuary zone, citing unusual animal behavior and ecosystem resilience. But in truth, it was because something in her broke open when the buffalo stood, and she would never admit it. In the following days, Kazi healed slowly. He still limped, still bled at the edges, but he walked. He drank. He nudged the calves gently with his massive horned head, checking them, as if confirming they were real. Layla brought in a camera crew from a local conservation group. They documented the story, hoping to inspire donations, but what they captured was something deeper than a viral clip. It was reverence. Footage of Kazi standing under a golden sky, calves at his side, scars glowing like medals. They titled it, "The Guardian." Thousands watched. Then millions. People cried. Children drew him. Veterans sent letters, saying they understood what it meant to survive for others. Somewhere in the city, a young boy who had lost his father in a fire watched the video and whispered, "He came back." Because Kazi had. Not just from death, but from the void where so many give up. He had returned not as what he was. The sun had long dipped below the horizon, leaving behind only a smoldering line of burnt orange on the edge of the sky, and as the stars crept out over the silent savanna, a thick hush fell upon the land, broken only by the occasional rustle of grass or the distant hoot of an owl. The wounded buffalo, breathing heavily and barely standing, remained pressed against the base of an ancient acacia tree where his herd had left him earlier in the day, a fading figure in the encroaching dark, his coat matted with blood and dust, his right flank torn open and raw. He had survived the attack, if it could be called that, an ambush more than a battle, launched by a group of adolescent lions that had sensed his vulnerability, but his resistance, his fury, had been unexpected and wild, and in the end, though they had left him broken, they too bore deep gashes from his horns and hooves, retreating with snarls of frustration rather than roars of victory. All day he had waited for them to return, but the lions had not. Perhaps they had moved on to easier prey, or perhaps his rage had taught them to fear him. Now, as the chill of the night settled into his bones and the smell of blood seemed to thicken in the air, he felt his strength waning again, his legs trembling beneath him, and yet his eyes remained wide, alert, searching the darkness for movement, not in fear, but in defiance, a spirit within him that refused to surrender, that burned even as his body broke. Somewhere out there, beyond the hills and tall grass, his herd moved on under the guidance of the old bull, unaware of the buffalo they had left behind, or perhaps unwilling to face the grief of knowing. But one buffalo had not forgotten. A younger female, slender but strong, with dark eyes and a quick gait, had lingered at the rear of the herd as they left the plain, her ears twitching, head constantly turning back toward the horizon, until at last, as the sun dipped and the others faded into the distance, she turned around and began retracing their steps. She had not spoken of her intentions, but her absence would soon be noticed. They called her Maria, and she had grown up beside the wounded bull when they were calves, playing in shallow rivers, head-butting gently in mock fights, and sharing shelter during the storms. Their connection was silent but unbreakable, born not from dominance or instinct but from something deeper, a loyalty that transcended the herd's rhythms, an unspoken promise never to abandon one another. Now she moved quickly, careful to stay downwind, avoiding predators and vultures that had already begun circling in the skies above. Her hooves moved with urgency, yet her breath remained steady, her heart hammering not from fear but from determination. When she finally found him, slumped near the base of the tree, eyes half closed and ribs heaving, her steps slowed and her body softened with relief and sorrow. She approached gently, nudging his side with her muzzle, and he opened his eyes just enough to recognize her scent. A soft sound escaped him, not a grunt, not a cry, but something in between, a whisper of recognition and disbelief. She stayed with him that night, pressing against his side to share warmth, licking the wounds that she could reach, her body shielding him from the wind and insects. No words passed between them, but something ancient did, something primal, one life refusing to let another slip away. In the deep of the night, distant roars echoed across the plains, and Maria tensed, her ears flicking, eyes searching the dark. She did not sleep, not even when the stars wheeled overhead and the moon cast pale light on the earth. Her vigil was silent but steadfast. At dawn, she nudged him again, gently urging him to rise. He tried. His legs buckled. He grunted, collapsing back onto the ground, dust puffing up around him. But she did not give up. She pawed at the ground beside him, mimicking the herd's call to move, and slowly, painfully, the buffalo forced himself upright, legs shaking beneath his massive weight. They began walking, Maria at his side, every few steps pausing as he caught his breath, her flank brushing his to remind him he wasn't alone. The journey back toward the herd was not short. It took them the entire day to cover a fraction of the distance. Vultures continued to circle. Once, a pair of hyenas approached from the west, sniffing the air, tongues lolling. Maria stepped in front of him, lowering her head and scraping the ground with a hoof, eyes locked on the intruders. They circled, sneering and pacing, but her stance did not falter, and eventually, they retreated, unsure whether this was truly prey or something more dangerous. That night they sheltered in a narrow gorge where the wind whistled through the rocks, and again she stood guard, only resting when his breath deepened into sleep. The third day, clouds gathered on the horizon and thunder rumbled in the distance. Rain began to fall in short, sharp bursts, cooling the ground and washing some of the blood from his hide. They moved faster now, the moisture softening the earth, giving him better footing. In the early evening, as the light faded again, they crested a small ridge and there, far below in the distance, moved the familiar silhouettes of the herd, slow and grazing, unaware of the drama that had unfolded behind them. Maria paused, looking down at them, then at him. He stood beside her, ribs still showing, eyes dulled by pain but lit now with something else, hope. They had made it. But their return was not met with silence. As they approached the outskirts of the herd, several buffalo turned sharply, then more, their nostrils flaring as they recognized the scent of one they believed lost. The old bull stepped forward, uncertain, his face unreadable. Maria did not flinch. She stood tall, walking beside the wounded one, brushing his side as if to say, "Look, he lived." The herd murmured and shifted, and then something extraordinary happened. One by one, the buffalo parted, making room, forming a protective circle around the two as they entered. The old bull grunted, once, deep and low, and nodded. No more questions were asked. No judgment passed. The bond between herd members, forged through migration, droughts and hunts, was stronger than pride. That night, they grazed together under the stars, the wounded buffalo laying at the center, surrounded by warmth, by memory, by belonging. Maria lay beside him, her eyes watching the horizon. She knew the lions would return one day. She knew the wild held no promises. But for now, in this fleeting moment of peace, surrounded by the soft breath of her kind, she had kept her promise. And that, more than anything, was survival. The days that followed the buffalo's return to the herd passed in a fragile rhythm, each sunrise painting the savanna with fresh light yet carrying the weight of unspoken threats that lingered just beyond the horizon. Kazi, the mighty bull who had once stood defiant against death itself, now moved among his kind with a slower gait, his massive frame marked by the scars of his battle, each step a testament to resilience and survival. The calves, once vulnerable and wide-eyed, had grown bolder, their trust in him unbroken, their presence a living reminder of why he fought so fiercely to live. Maria stayed close, her loyalty unwavering, the quiet companion to his wounded journey. But beneath the surface of their hard-won peace, a storm was gathering, not one of wind and rain, but one forged by human hands, the kind of storm that changes landscapes and lives with cold efficiency. Word had reached the reserve from the outskirts of the nearby settlement. A new development project was planned, a vast fenced enclosure meant to convert miles of open plains into farmland and lodges for tourists. The project promised economic growth, but threatened to shatter the delicate balance of life that Kazi and his herd relied upon. The arrival of surveyors, heavy machinery, and chainsaws was imminent. Elias and Layla received the news with grim expressions. Elias, the seasoned ranger who had long protected the reserve with quiet determination, saw in Kazi a reflection of his own stubborn will to survive, a fight against forces beyond natural predators. Layla, whose young idealism had been tempered by years of witnessing destruction, felt a painful sting of helplessness. Together with Dr. Meredith Shaw, whose initial skepticism had softened into reluctant respect for Kazi's survival, they began to plan. They needed to act quickly to protect the buffalo, the calves, and the fragile ecosystem. The plan was risky, challenging legal boundaries and requiring the cooperation of local communities who had mixed feelings about the reserve and the economic promises of the development. Kazi, unaware of the human machinations but sensing tension in the air, continued to heal. His body regained strength day by day, though he carried a quiet weariness, a weight deeper than wounds visible to the eye. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the grasses with hues of amber and fire, Kazi stood at the edge of a watering hole, watching the reflections ripple with the breeze. Maria approached, her presence gentle yet insistent. She nudged his side and lowered her head. Without words, their bond spoke volumes. They both knew change was coming, and that survival would demand more than strength or loyalty. It would demand courage to face the unknown. Meanwhile, the young calves began to explore further, their curiosity a balm and a risk. One afternoon, a shadow passed overhead, a helicopter surveying the land, its drone piercing the quiet like a harbinger of intrusion. The calves panicked, scattering to the tall grass. Kazi responded instinctively, letting out a low bellow that reverberated across the plains, calling them back. His voice was both command and comfort, a tether to safety. But the message was clear. Their world was shrinking. One night, under a swollen moon, Elias stood with Layla at the ridge overlooking the plains, binoculars in hand. Lights flickered in the distance, machines clearing trees, marking boundaries, invading the ancient lands. "They're coming faster than we thought," Layla said, her voice tight with urgency. "If we don't act now, there won't be a herd to protect." Elias nodded grimly. "We'll need to rally the community. Show them what's at stake. This isn't just about buffalo, it's about all of us." Over the next weeks, they organized meetings with local ranchers, elders and children, sharing stories of Kazi's survival, the calves' innocence, and the land's fragile beauty. Slowly, resistance grew. People who once saw the buffalo as mere wildlife began to see them as symbols of endurance, of heritage, of a bond that transcended species and generations. But not all were convinced. Developers pushed back, armed with permits and promises of prosperity. Conflict simmered, legal battles looming like thunderclouds ready to burst. In the midst of this turmoil, Kazi's strength waned suddenly one dawn. He collapsed near the watering hole, breath shallow, eyes glassy. Maria rushed to his side, her body pressed against his, low mournful calls breaking the morning stillness. Layla and Elias were called immediately. The vet's hands were gentle yet sure, probing the swelling in his chest, listening to the rasping breath. "It's an infection," Layla said softly, worry etching her features. "If we don't act fast, it could be fatal." Medicine was scarce, but the team improvised, administering antibiotics and fluids, tending to the great beast as if he were family. Days passed in a tense blur. Kazi's breathing improved slowly, but the infection left him weak. Yet even in his frailty, his spirit remained unyielding. One afternoon, as Layla sat beside him, reading quietly from a book of poetry, the buffalo raised his head and fixed her with eyes that spoke of gratitude and something deeper, an ancient wisdom that seemed to cross the divide between species. "You're more than a survivor," she whispered. "You're a guardian." Outside, the herd stayed close, as if sensing the fragility of their leader. Maria stood watchful, her eyes fierce. Night after night, under the vast, star-studded sky, the plains held their breath. Then, the crescendo came. On a morning heavy with humidity, bulldozers arrived at the reserve's edge. Chainsaws roared through the trees, and fences began to rise. The buffalo reacted instinctively, fear and fury ignited within the herd. Kazi, despite his weakened state, led a charge toward the machines, his hooves pounding the earth in defiance, his voice a thunder that shook the air. The calves followed, young voices raised in wild cries, and Maria stayed steadfast beside him. Human workers stopped, stunned by the sight of the great bull and his family. Elias and Layla rushed forward, raising hands, shouting for calm. The standoff lasted for hours, a tense dance of wills between man and beast. Then something unexpected happened. A local elder, a man who had once doubted the value of the reserve, stepped forward. He spoke of tradition, of respect for the land and its creatures, of the buffalo as a symbol of endurance and pride. His words carried weight, and the crowd hushed. Slowly, a dialogue began. Agreements were forged, compromise reached, and a plan was made to designate the core of the reserve as a protected sanctuary, preserving the buffalo's home and the fragile ecosystem. Kazi, standing tall once more, watched as the machines retreated, the plains breathing again under the open sky. Though his body bore the scars of battles fought and hardships endured, his spirit soared. The calves nuzzled against him, innocent and strong, and Maria's eyes reflected the dawn of a new beginning. In the weeks that followed, visitors came, not to exploit, but to learn, to witness the resilience of life in its rawest form. Children gathered to hear stories of the great bull who defied death, who chose love and sacrifice over surrender. Elias and Layla worked tirelessly, inspired by the very creature they fought to save, their own hearts healed by the lessons etched into Kazi's battered hide. And somewhere beneath the ancient acacia tree, where the earth held the echoes of struggle and hope, the dawn broke over the vast expanse of the savanna, painting the sky in hues of fiery orange and soft pink, a fragile beauty that belied the tension simmering beneath the surface of the land. Kazi, though scarred and slowed by his recent battles, stood tall and proud amidst the herd, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the rising sun, a living testament to survival and resilience. Maria grazed nearby, ever watchful, her dark eyes scanning the horizon as if sensing the unseen currents that shifted the fate of all who called this land home. The sanctuary, newly established through the combined efforts of the local community, conservationists, and the tireless work of Elias and Layla, had brought a fragile hope, a promise that for now, at least, the buffalo and their ecosystem might endure the encroaching threats of human expansion. But peace on the savanna was always tentative. Word had reached the reserve of increased poaching activity on the fringes of protected lands, the cruel hands of greed and desperation reaching ever closer to the fragile heart of the sanctuary. One evening, as the air grew thick with the scent of acacia blooms and distant fires, Elias and Layla prepared for a patrol along the eastern boundary. They moved quietly, their flashlights piercing the gathering darkness as they followed tracks and disturbed earth that spoke of recent intrusions. The weight of responsibility bore down on them. Every step forward felt like a gamble between hope and despair. Suddenly, the beam of Elias's flashlight caught movement, a shadow slipping between the trees. Heart pounding, he signaled to Layla, and they advanced cautiously, voices low but firm as they called out warnings. The figure froze, then bolted, disappearing into the underbrush. The chase was short but frantic, leaving behind signs of a hurried retreat and a discarded snare. The reality was clear, the sanctuary's boundaries were no longer safe, and the fight to protect Kazi's herd was far from over. That night, under a canopy of stars that seemed indifferent to the struggles below, Kazi lay beside Maria, the calves nestled close, their breathing steady and calm. Yet, in his dreams, shadows of fire and clawed hands haunted him, echoes of battles fought and those yet to come. He knew the land was changing, that the invisible war between man and nature was escalating, and that his role as guardian was evolving beyond the physical. Days later, a new arrival stirred the quiet rhythms of the reserve. A young woman named Amara, a wildlife photographer and activist, set foot on the land with a camera in hand and fire in her heart. She had heard whispers of Kazi's story, the buffalo who defied death and human greed, and she came determined to capture not just images but the soul of a struggle that many chose to ignore. Amara's presence breathed fresh energy into the sanctuary. She spent hours in the golden light, her lens trained on Kazi and the herd, her fingers steady despite the wildness of her subjects. With patience and respect, she began to unravel the layers of connection between the animals and their habitat, weaving stories through photographs that spoke of fragility, strength, and an ancient bond between life and land. Her images caught the attention of distant cities and social media, sparking conversations and drawing supporters from places Kazi and the others could never reach. Meanwhile, back at the ranger station, Elias and Layla grappled with new challenges. Poachers became bolder, using sophisticated traps and nighttime raids that threatened to undo months of progress. The sanctuary's resources were stretched thin, and alliances with local communities, once tentative, became essential to survival. They trained young volunteers, teaching them not just to track and patrol, but to understand the delicate balance of the ecosystem, the stories hidden in every hoofprint and broken twig. One evening, a particularly brutal snares incident left Maria injured, caught and struggling in a wire trap left carelessly by a poacher. The pain in her eyes was a stark mirror of the scars Kazi bore, and the urgency of the moment galvanized the entire team. Layla, with trembling hands but unwavering resolve, tended to Maria's wounds, while Elias coordinated a search for the perpetrators. The incident shook the sanctuary's fragile sense of safety but also ignited a fierce determination to protect what was left. In the midst of this turmoil, Kazi's role shifted. No longer just a survivor, he became a symbol, a living link between the ancient wild and the modern world. His movements were watched closely, his presence calming the herd, inspiring the human caretakers, and reminding all who encountered him that nature's spirit was not easily broken. One crisp morning, as the sun cast long shadows over the plains, a group of children from a nearby village arrived at the sanctuary, led by a local teacher who had embraced the stories of Kazi and the buffalo's struggle. The children's wide eyes and eager questions brought a new dimension to the fight for conservation, hope for a future generation that might choose coexistence over destruction. Kazi, standing at the edge of the waterhole, seemed to acknowledge them with a slow, deliberate nod, as if passing a silent blessing. Yet, even as the sanctuary blossomed with renewed purpose, the looming threat of human development cast a shadow. Legal battles persisted, political pressures mounted, and in quiet moments, Elias feared that despite their efforts, the land they fought for could be lost. But in those moments, he would look to Kazi and find strength. The buffalo's resilience was not just in his scars or muscles but in his unyielding spirit, the choice to stand even when the odds were stacked high. One afternoon, after a fierce thunderstorm that left the earth saturated and fragrant, Kazi wandered alone to a distant ridge overlooking the valley below. From this vantage point, he saw the mosaic of life, the herds grazing peacefully, birds darting through the sky, humans tending their roles in the distance, and the fragile line where wilderness met civilization. He lowered his head, feeling the wind carry the scent of rain and grass, of survival and loss, of hope and sacrifice. In that moment, the boundary between species seemed to blur, and Kazi's heart beat not just for himself or his herd but for all who called this land home. As night fell and the stars wheeled overhead in silent constellations, Amara captured one last image, a silhouette of Kazi standing tall against the fading light, a guardian whose story had become a beacon of courage and connection. Her camera clicked softly, preserving a moment that would inspire generations. The struggle was far from over, but the message was clear. Love, loyalty, and sacrifice were forces that transcended boundaries, capable of shaping destinies in a world constantly on the brink of change. And as the wind whispered through the grasses, carrying the echoes of ancient drums and the soft calls of life, Kazi stood unwavering, a reminder that true strength lies not in dominion but in the courage to protect, to endure, and to hope. What does true guardianship mean to you? Share your thoughts and keep the spirit alive. The sun was a burning orb sinking slowly into the western horizon, casting long shadows across the sprawling savanna as the cool evening breeze stirred the tall grasses in gentle waves. Kazi stood atop a low ridge, his massive frame silhouetted against the fiery sky, muscles tense but eyes calm, reflecting the twilight hues and the weight of battles fought and yet to come. The sanctuary that had once seemed a fragile promise now pulsed with life and purpose, a beacon of hope amidst encroaching threats, but beneath its surface, danger loomed sharper and more insidious than before. The poachers, undeterred by failed attempts and increased patrols, had shifted tactics. They moved stealthily under cover of darkness, setting traps near watering holes and pathways, targeting not just buffalo but other vulnerable species, their greed blind to the delicate web they threatened to unravel. Kazi, sensing the shifting dangers through the subtle whispers of the wind and the nervous energy of the herd, remained ever vigilant. His body, though scarred and burdened by age and injury, carried the spirit of a guardian unbroken. Maria stayed at his side, her youthful strength a counterbalance to his wisdom, and together they moved through the grasslands, guiding the herd to safer grounds, teaching the young calves the silent language of survival. Meanwhile, the human defenders of the sanctuary worked tirelessly, their days and nights blending into a continuous struggle to outwit those who sought to destroy. Elias and Layla coordinated with local authorities, tracking snares and signs of illegal activity, while Amara's photographs stirred growing public awareness and international support. Yet, despite the progress, setbacks were frequent and harsh. One chilling night, under a new moon, a desperate cry shattered the stillness, a calf trapped in a poacher's snare, thrashing and bleeding. The herd's panic was palpable, a chaotic storm of fear and anguish, but Kazi's bellow cut through the turmoil, rallying his family with a commanding presence that quelled the chaos and refocused their energy. Maria darted through the shadows, guiding Elias and Layla to the trapped calf, her urgent calls blending with the humans' hurried movements. Together, they worked swiftly, cutting the cruel wire and tending to the injury, but the calf's trauma echoed deeply in the herd's collective spirit. That night, under a blanket of stars, the sanctuary held a vigil, not just for the calf, but for all lives endangered by the relentless tide of human greed and ignorance. In this shared grief, a renewed determination blossomed. Across the plains, news of the sanctuary's plight reached the ears of influential voices, scientists, activists, and leaders who understood that Kazi's story was not just a tale of survival but a call to action. Funding and resources flowed in, enabling better surveillance, education programs for local communities, and restoration of damaged habitats. Yet, the heart of the fight remained on the ground, where every sunrise brought fresh challenges. One afternoon, as the herd moved toward a new grazing area, Kazi paused, sensing unfamiliar scents on the breeze. His eyes narrowed as he spotted a sleek vehicle creeping along the reserve's border, foreign faces, cameras, and equipment unfamiliar to the guardians of the land. Amara approached cautiously, her instincts alerting her to the arrival of a documentary crew eager to capture the wilderness but unaware of the fragile balance they might disrupt. Conversations with the crew led to understanding and respect, and soon, their footage told the story of Kazi and his herd to audiences worldwide, igniting conversations about conservation and coexistence. However, not all encounters were so hopeful. A severe drought descended upon the region, scorching the earth and drying the rivers. Water became scarce, tensions within the herd rising as competition for the precious resource intensified. Kazi's leadership was tested like never before as he navigated the treacherous dynamics of survival, not just against predators or poachers, but against the unforgiving hand of nature itself. In the blistering heat, Kazi led the herd on a grueling journey to a distant river known only through the stories of elders and the faint memory of past migrations. The calves stumbled, their legs weakening, and Maria frequently circled back to nudge the struggling young ones forward, her fierce loyalty shining through exhaustion. The humans, too, felt the strain. Elias and Layla coordinated emergency water drops and built temporary watering holes, but they knew these were stopgaps in a growing crisis. As the herd reached the riverbank, the sight of flowing water was met with a collective gasp, a moment of pure relief and joy. Yet, even in this reprieve, the shadows of conflict remained. Other animals, driven by the drought, converged on the same water source, leading to tense standoffs and skirmishes that tested the herd's unity and Kazi's authority. One fateful day, as the sun blazed mercilessly overhead, a wildfire ignited on the far side of the reserve, its hungry flames devouring grass and trees with terrifying speed. The smoke thickened, choking the air and turning day into night. Panic rippled through the herd as the fire advanced, forcing Kazi to make a heart-wrenching choice: lead the herd through dangerous terrain toward uncertain safety, or risk the flames in hopes of reaching open ground. The journey was brutal. Ash fell like snow, and the air burned in their lungs. Calves stumbled, adults pushed forward despite blistered hooves and scorched hides. Maria stayed at Kazi's side, guiding and protecting as best she could. Humans raced to create firebreaks and lead the herd away from the inferno, but the unpredictability of the blaze kept everyone on edge. Amidst the chaos, a calf became separated, its frightened cries piercing the smoky haze. Without hesitation, Kazi plunged back into the burning grass, eyes blazing with determination. The rescue was perilous, the heat seared his flesh, and the smoke blinded, but his strength and will propelled him forward. He reached the calf just as flames licked at his legs, gently nudging it toward safety. When they rejoined the herd, the calf's mother greeted them with tears in her eyes, a raw moment of reunion that epitomized the sanctuary's spirit. The fire eventually burned out, leaving behind a scarred landscape, but the herd survived, battered but unbroken. The humans, animals, and the land itself seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief and sorrow. In the weeks that followed, nature began its slow healing, grasses sprouting anew, rivers swelling with rain, and life returning to the blackened earth. Kazi stood once more among his family, a symbol of endurance and hope. His eyes, though marked by age and hardship, shone with a wisdom born of survival, sacrifice, and an unbreakable bond that defied the boundaries between species. As Amara captured the moment, a lone buffalo silhouetted against the horizon's soft glow, she whispered a promise to tell his story far and wide, to remind the world that guardianship is an act of love as fierce as any fire and as enduring as the land itself. The struggle was far from over, but in the face of devastation, the spirit of the herd endured, teaching all who witnessed it that true strength lies not only in power but in compassion, courage, and the unyielding choice to protect life against all odds. What battles have you faced that tested your courage and love? Share your story, and help keep the flame of hope alive. The dawn was soft and cool over the savannah, the golden light stretching slowly across the healing earth where blackened scars from the recent wildfire still marked the land, but life was returning. Delicate shoots of green pushing through the ash, birdsong weaving through the gentle morning breeze, and the steady rhythms of the herd as they moved together, a living testament to survival and rebirth. Kazi, though older and bearing the weight of countless battles on his broad shoulders, stood tall and steady, his eyes reflecting the dawn of a new era, one filled with hope, challenges, and the enduring bonds forged between creature and human, land and spirit. The sanctuary had become more than just a refuge, it was now a symbol, a cause that resonated beyond borders, uniting people from far and near in a shared commitment to protect what was wild and precious. Amara's photographs and stories had stirred hearts and minds worldwide, drawing support and attention that translated into tangible change. A growing network of rangers, improved protections, and educational programs reaching the children of neighboring villages. These young faces, once distant from the struggles of the wild, now carried seeds of stewardship in their eyes, their laughter mingling with the calls of the wild as they learned to walk gently on the land that was their heritage. Elias and Layla, their resolve hardened yet tempered by years of hardship, found solace in these small victories, their bond deepening as they worked side by side to nurture the sanctuary into a lasting sanctuary not only for buffalo but for the myriad creatures that called the savannah home. But the world beyond the sanctuary was still fraught with uncertainty. Development pressures remained, political tides shifted, and new threats emerged. Yet the story of Kazi and his herd had ignited a spark that could not easily be extinguished, a collective consciousness awakening to the fragile beauty of coexistence. One afternoon, as the herd grazed peacefully near a shimmering waterhole, Kazi sensed a familiar presence, a young bull from a neighboring herd, strong and unscarred, yet respectful in his approach. There was a moment of tense stillness before the two bulls touched foreheads in a silent greeting, an ancient ritual of acknowledgement and peace. This meeting marked the beginning of a tentative alliance, a bridging of divides forged through shared struggle and the instinct to protect family and land. Maria, watching closely, sensed the significance and nuzzled Kazi with quiet encouragement. Together, the herds began to roam wider territories, their combined strength a living barrier against predators and human threats alike. As the seasons turned, the sanctuary flourished. The rains returned in full, filling the rivers and revitalizing the grasses. The calves, some born after the fire, grew strong and sure, their spirited energy a balm to the weary. Kazi moved among them with the steady grace of a protector whose role was evolving from warrior to wise elder, his presence a grounding force for both buffalo and humans. One evening, beneath a sky awash with stars, Elias and Layla sat beside Amara around a campfire. The crackling flames cast dancing shadows on their faces, their conversation weaving memories of loss and hope, struggle and triumph. They spoke of Kazi, not just as a mighty buffalo but as a symbol of resilience and connection that transcended species and circumstance. "He's more than just an animal," Elias said softly. "He's a teacher. A reminder of what we can endure and overcome if we stand together." Layla nodded, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "And what we owe to the land, to each other." Amara smiled, her camera resting beside her. "His story is far from over. It's a legacy we carry forward." In the following months, the sanctuary became a living classroom, a place where scientists, locals, and visitors converged to learn about the delicate balance of ecosystems and the profound ties between all living beings. Kazi, often seen standing sentinel beneath the acacia trees, became a silent mentor to all who sought understanding. Children painted murals in the nearby villages depicting the great buffalo who had fought not just for survival but for love and community. Elders told stories around fires, ensuring the lessons of the land and the guardian would not be forgotten. Yet, amid this flourishing, the echoes of past struggles lingered. Kazi's body, though strong, showed signs of the relentless passage of time, stiffness in his joints, slower responses, and the quiet moments when his gaze grew distant. Maria remained close, her youth and strength a living continuation of the legacy he embodied. One clear morning, as the sun kissed the horizon with gentle light, Kazi led the herd to a familiar clearing, the place where the fire had raged and life had been tested. There, beneath the shade of a towering acacia, he lowered his massive head and rested, a serene expression settling over his weathered features. The herd gathered around, a living circle of family and hope. Elias, Layla, and Amara approached quietly, sensing the profound moment unfolding. No words were needed. The buffalo, whose life had intertwined with theirs in ways both tangible and spiritual, was passing into the next chapter, a guardian at rest, his spirit woven into the fabric of the land he had fought to protect. In the days that followed, the sanctuary held a silent vigil, honoring Kazi's journey and the powerful legacy he left behind. The calves grew, the herds thrived, and the land whispered stories of courage, love, and sacrifice carried on the wind. A statue was erected near the entrance to the sanctuary, a simple but powerful tribute, a bronze buffalo, standing tall and proud, eyes cast toward the horizon, embodying the spirit of a guardian who chose love and loyalty above all else. Visitors who came to the sanctuary found inspiration not only in the beauty of the wild but in the story of Kazi, a reminder that true strength is measured by the courage to protect, the willingness to sacrifice, and the capacity to love beyond boundaries. And so, beneath the endless sky, where the grasses sway and the stars wheel overhead, the echoes of Kazi's footsteps remain, a call to all who listen that the ties between beings are threads of hope, weaving a future where wild hearts can beat free, and the spirit of guardianship endures. What legacy will you leave behind? Share your reflections and help keep the story of courage and love alive for generations to come.